So let's have a look further at the book of Deuteronomy. And to help us, I want to go to the Bible Project and its presentation on the book of Deuteronomy. So if you want to get a nice overview, about 7 or 8 minutes long, of a book like Deuteronomy, you can get a wonderful overview from the Bible Project where they present major themes in each of the book. They begin by reminding us that the book of Deuteronomy continues after 40 years, after they have left Egypt and they travel towards the promised land, after the journey through the desert, after the covenant has been given on the first set of 10 commandments as they set off, and then they were broken because of their disobedience and making of the golden calf. And now, 40 years later, their children are about to enter the promised land. And so the second giving of the commandments is given. The Deuteronomy, second commandments given, is read out by Moses to the new generation, explaining the laws and the Torah laws that will bring blessing into the new generation. And so we're reminded of the journey in our own lives and in our churches that they move from generation to generation. It begins with a call to faithfulness. In the center of the book, in chapters 12 to 26, there are laws that are given that will make a person wise and they'll be able to flourish, like Proverbs. But these are central to the character of God. These laws will help people to be wise. In 11 chapters, before we get to these laws, we have Moses' opening speech, reminding them in chapters 1, 2, and 3 of the history of the journey. And then after the giving of the laws, there's an encouraging speech to the new generation in chapters 27 to 34 who are going in. So let's have a look at the beginning when the story so far is told about the rebellion of the people against God's grace and giving of his commandments. Judgment comes and a great deal is lost. And even Moses strikes the rock and he too loses a great deal. In chapters 4 to 11, Moses says, let's turn now to be faithful to the covenant. And he reads out in chapter 4, the Shema. Listen, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your might. In Deuteronomy 6, 4 and 5. And we see in this Shema statement in chapter 6 a summary of the major themes in Deuteronomy. That is, firstly, it's important to listen, to hear God, but not just to hear, but also to respond to God's word, to seek to understand it, to obey it and apply it. Secondly, to love God, not just with emotions, but with your whole being and commitment and decision and devotion. And then the combination of listening and loving leads to a seeking for a better understanding, to know the word, to enter into the word, to read it and to apply it daily so that we might be transformed and become a people of God, a kingdom for God, a kingdom of priests who are in relationship with God and able to help others to come into relationship with God with wisdom, justice, and love being able to be shared amongst one another and with others. Central to this theme is the notion that God is one. And so we're to come in worship to God who is one. And this word one means that God before creation is perfect and good, holding all things together. He is one. As creation continues, God holds it all together with goodness and perfection. He is one. And this dramatically contrasts with other nations who describe gods battling with one another. They make idols and they say God is in this stone idol or that idol. They make God to be in a tree or in the sun or the stars. In contrast to this, God is seen as the one true God behind all things. In response to that, we come seeking to know God, and one place we can find him is when we come to the one true temple where we can meet with God. And in the New Testament, we see a fresh understanding of temple visible in the lives of godly people, in the lives of godly leaders gathering people together. God is invisible and he's in all places rather than just in one building. But a building can be useful where we remember the poor. That is, they gave a tenth not only to support the temple and the priests, but they also gave a tenth to support the poor once every 3 years. And so this is radically different to those cultures that would be crushing the poor or neglecting the poor. This makes the laws of God different to the culture that surrounds. And the leaders too were to be godly and caring rather than self-serving. And the elders, priests, and kings should obey the law and should listen to prophets who critique if they go the wrong way and critique the people if they go the wrong way. They're not an answer just to themselves, they listen. And there are civil laws that guide marriage and family and business, and they bring social justice so people don't cheat one another, people do good for one another, love one another, particularly the widow, the orphan, the migrant. Now, we're reminded that these laws are given in an ancient culture to a particular time and place. And so the laws may not all apply to us. That is, we may not have to bring exactly the same sacrifice that they brought in their ancient culture. We may not have to go to a temple such as the one built in ancient times. And so there is an ancient context for this, but there are also principles that apply to all time and to us today. And so we can learn a lot that we can apply into our own lives. So we have to be careful not just to compare these straight out and say they're identical to our modern laws. We need to compare them to other ancient laws in ancient times, such as the laws of the ancient societies like the Assyrians and the laws of the Egyptians and the Hammurabi laws. So Israel had a higher sense of justice than their own time, but it may not be identical to what's happening in our time as they move on and journey towards a better world and a better time that lies ahead. If you want to get some extra credit and learn a bit more, you might want to read about the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 9, verse 9, and Deuteronomy 25. So if you go to 1 Corinthians 9, and we read there in 1 Corinthians 9, reminds us there in 1 Corinthians 9 that in verse 9, he reminds us that it's written in the law of Moses, do not muzzle an ox. But it's not just about an ox, it's about all things. And so whenever there's a spiritual need, so the laws can be applied more broadly. It's not just about an ox more broadly. And so that's just a little exercise there that you might want to think about. And then finally, we come to that final speech where we see Moses declare a warning. If you listen and obey, you'll be blessed. But if you do not listen and do not obey and rebel, then devastation can come upon you. So the book of Deuteronomy really draws together the possibility of blessing in our lives if we hear God. And Moses says, God has set before us life and death, blessing or curse, good and evil. And he encourages them, choose life and blessing and obeying the law and God and seeking relationship with God, and avoid the dangers of straying from God and putting other things in place of God. And then in the very end of the book, he says, there will be generations to come. There will be people that will rebel and people will lose a great deal, and enemies will come and take them captive. There'll be people like Job who suffer. There'll be people like the future generation taken captive by Assyria and by Babylon. But remember, even then, God is able to bring back the people from captivity and restore them and give them a new leader. And God, Jeremiah reminds us, and also in um, other books of the Old Testament, such as Ezekiel, we're reminded that God is able to come and give us a new heart, and God is able to heal the very inner part of the being and pour His Spirit out upon us and in our lives so that we can be transformed and changed. In answer to the rebellion, such as that which we saw in Genesis in the garden, God can give a new heart that can be focused on Him, and people can flourish and know fullness of life. Jeremiah 31, Ezekiel 36 speaks again of this promise of a new heart. And then the book closes in Deuteronomy with a poem of blessing for those who turn to God with their whole heart and mind and know the fullness of God's blessing. Certain questions are left unanswered. That is, when will the defeat of evil come? And who is the one who's going to rescue, and how will that come? Is it David or Solomon? But then one comes in the New Testament who brings a greater measure of rescue. How can we become holy even when at times we're moved towards rebellion? And then how can our hearts be transformed? And we find some of these answers in the New Testament, which we'll look at tomorrow in as we go beyond Book of Deuteronomy, looking ahead. After the break, we're going to have a closer look at some of these major themes in the book of Deuteronomy. So let's take a 10-minute break now. You might want to chat. You might want to make a few notes of what stood out to you and gather a few extra notes. In 10 minutes, we'll come back and we will have a look further in greater depth at some of these insights. So I'll see you in 10 minutes time.
Oi, Sudesh. Sudesh. Hello, Sudesh. Sudesh knows what to do.
Oh, Peter,
के भयो बोला न
होमवर्क
के
गर्नु
भयो
छैन है होमवर्क
कसको
गर्नु छैन है तिमीले
कसको
तिमीले गरेछ कि छैन मिनिस्ट्री फर्महरू भरेछ कि छैन
केही भरेको छैन अब तिमीले भर्यौ
छैन अब कतिवटा बुझाउनु पर्ने हो 9वटा हो
के थाहा छ नि कतिवटा हो कसलाई उसमा शम्भुलाई होइन
अँ
केमा मिनिस्ट्री फर्म मैले त बनाइसकेको छु मिनिस्ट्री फर्महरू होइन।
त्यसलाई प्रिन्ट गर्नुपर्छ, प्रिन्ट गरेर पास्टरको सिग्नेचर गरेर बुझाउनुपर्छ।
कतिवटा टोटल चाहिँ कतिवटा भइसक्यो टोटल चाहिने चाहिँ कतिवटा हो?
खोइ 9वटा, कसले भन्छ 12वटा भन्छ, कसैले 9वटा भन्छ, के हो के हो।
मैले त यार टन्नै बनाएको छु बनाउनु त ठिकै हो।
अनि त्यो प्रिचिङ पनि बनाएको छ, प्रिचिङ
टिचिङ त एउटै बनाएको छैन, तिमी बनायो?
मैले 5वटा कि कतिवटा बनाएको थिएँ।
हो र? केमा उसमा पावर पोइन्टमा?
अँ त्यो पनि प्रिन्ट गर्नुपर्छ है। अनि तिमीले रिसर्च पनि गर्यो?
रिसर्च त म गरिरहेको छु नि।
अब
तिमी
कलेजले हामीलाई
कति
कहिले बोलाउँछ होला है?
तिमी शम्भुकोमा होइन?
म होइन, पुरानो सर्कलमा।
ए पुरानो सर्कलमा त चिल छ नि फेरि।
के अरे नामै बिर्सेँ मैले। हामीलाई कलेजले अब छिटै बोलाउँछ होला है? हाम्रो जुनमा
बोलाउँछ नि,
ग्रेजुएसन
त्यही भएर
होइन?
सकेसम्म अरू भन्दा नि सर्न चाहिँ छिटो सक्नुपर्छ कि अरू केही नगरे नि। रिसर्च त के छ र यार, रिसर्च त जसरी पनि बुक्सबाट बिस्तारै गुगलबाट यताउता गरेर नि गर्नु सकिन्छ।
तर प्रिचिङ चाहिँ भ्याउनै पर्छ।
मेन भनेको प्रिचिङ अलिक टाइम लगाउँछ नि त त्यसले क्या। त्यही थिम सिम बनाउँदा 2000 जस्तो टाइम बुझाइदिन्छ।
त्यसलाई पनि प्रिन्ट गरेर बुझाउनु पर्छ, दुइटै बुझाउनु पर्छ, मिनिस्ट्री फर्म र त्यो।
है मैले त बिर्सिए नि सकेँ कसरी बनाउँदै थिएँ नि यार सर्भन त पहिला। म त
अब
केटाहरूलाई भन्नु
कलेजले छिटै बोलाउने होला।
ठिकै हो।
जुनमा ग्रेजुएसन होइन?
के थाहा हो के छ छ्या।
अहिले कहाँ हो तिमी?
म घरमा हो नि।
के गर्नु, तराईमा बस्ने मान्छेको झुलले कहिले छोड्दैन।